One motorcycle forced the world to slow down, not because it crashed or failed, but because it worked too well. The speed was real, but the silence that followed was even louder. So why did they bury it without ever saying a word? Here is the real truth behind Suzuki's banned motorcycle, the speed war that started it all. At the end of the 1990s, Japan's biggest motorcycle manufacturers were locked in a quiet but escalating race, not for sales, not for looks, but for sheer speed. Kawasaki had led the charge with its ZX-11, a machine that flew past 170 miles per hour and forced the industry to rethink what was physically possible on two wheels. Honda answered in 1996 with the CBR 1100 Tech's Super Blackbird, a name chosen with intent, a machine tuned for dominance. For a short while, it worked, but Suzuki didn't want to play catch-up. They wanted to end the game entirely. Behind closed doors in Hamamatsu, Suzuki engineers weren't just working on a new superbike. They were planning a kill shot, not a machine to compete, a machine to obliterate. The goal was simple, but radical. Build a production motorcycle so fast, so stable, and so terrifying, it would make the entire industry pause, and then back off. It started with a name, Hayabusa. In Japanese, it means peregrine falcon, the fastest bird on Earth. But the metaphor went deeper. The falcon's natural prey, the blackbird. The falcon arrives. When the Suzuki Hayabusa was unveiled in 1999, the world didn't quite know how to react. It wasn't elegant like the Honda Blackbird or angular like a sport racing GSX-R. It looked swollen, alien, designed more for a wind tunnel than a showroom floor. Its rounded front, tapered tail, and sunken headlight gave it the posture of something that didn't just ride through the air, it punched a hole through it. And then there was the number, 194 miles per hour. This was faster than anything else available for public roads, period. It was so fast, it almost didn't make sense. The Hayabusa redefined what a top-speed motorcycle could look like, sound like, feel like. It wasn't twitchy like a track bike. It was purposeful, heavy, yes, but the weight worked in its favor. It made the machine stable at unthinkable speeds, something engineers had fine-tuned with wind tunnel tests that included full gear, real riders, and obsessive adjustments to drag surfaces, a new kind of arms race. The reaction from the industry was swift, but not in the way you might expect. There were no immediate challengers, no press conferences boasting higher numbers, no factory Hayabusa killers rushing to the floor. Instead, there was a long pause, one that looked a lot like hesitation, because the Hayabusa hadn't just broken the speed record, it had scared the hell out of everyone. In motorcycle culture, speed had always been a badge of honor, but this was different. This wasn't about reaching the edge. This was about flying past it with no visible consequence. And that raised serious questions, not just from engineers or competitors, but from lawmakers, journalists, and insurers. Did the public need access to a 194 miles per hour motorcycle? Could any rider handle that much power? Was this the future, or was it a mistake? Those weren't questions Suzuki had time to answer. The Hayabusa had already hit the streets, and in garages around the world, riders were already climbing aboard what would become one of the most talked about motorcycles in modern history. From apex predator to cultural icon. It's easy to forget that the Hayabusa wasn't launched as a niche curiosity or collector's item. It was a mainstream production bike, sold to anyone with the courage, might, and credit to bring it home. It was available on showroom floors like any other Suzuki, and that's what made it so unsettling. The Hayabusa also forced the entire motorcycle world to reconsider what came next. Would manufacturers now push for 200 miles per hour? Would government step in before they did? And was this level of performance something the public or the industry was really ready for? One thing was clear, Suzuki had changed the rules. Right from its very first sketches, the design defied every accepted standard of what a sport bike was supposed to be. This wasn't a machine refined for elegance or track day bragging rights. It was a weapon, engineered not to compete, but to overwhelm. And that intention showed in every curve. Most superbikes were built to turn heads in the showroom. The Hayabusa was designed to turn air into submission. It looked bloated to some, grotesque to others. But for Suzuki's engineering team, led by designer Koji Yoshira, the goal wasn't beauty, it was aerodynamic domination. In interviews, Yoshira later admitted the bike was intentionally a little grotesque, a form that couldn't be ignored, shaped in a tunnel, not a boardroom. Suzuki didn't just sketch the Hayabusa and hope it would fly. They took it straight to the wind tunnel, not once or twice, but obsessively. The engineers tested it with a rider in full gear, in different positions, on real-world setups. Every part of the bike, down to the fairings, the nose, the underbody, even the rider's own posture, was tested, adjusted, then tested again. The result was radical. At a time when most manufacturers were still trimming fairings for weight, Suzuki was sculpting the body like the nose of a bullet train. Smooth, round, long, and tightly integrated. Not just to cheat the wind, but to command it. At 200 miles per hour, air doesn't just resist, it attacks. It pulls, pushes, and threatens to tear machines apart. Suzuki's solution was to stop treating the wind like an obstacle and start treating it like a system to be managed. Channeled, redirected, conquered. From the side, the Hayabusa looked swollen. From the front, it looked like a missile. The rider wasn't an afterthought. They were part of the design. The tank was sculpted to allow a full tuck. The seat and pegs were positioned to minimize drag, and the front screen was sunken low enough to let your helmet kiss the glass, the beast within. But shape was only one half of the story. What truly set the Hayabusa apart was the power beneath that bulbous skin. Instead of refining a typical 1000cc platform like Honda and Kawasaki were doing, Suzuki made a leap that felt almost reckless. They installed a 1298cc inline-4 engine that pushed 175 horsepower and 103 lb-ft of torque, numbers that shattered expectations for a road-legal bike in 1999. This was a sport bike built like a cruise missile. The engine wasn't just powerful, it was smooth. Suzuki added a gear-driven counterbalancer, a move that kept the massive engine from shaking itself, or the rider, apart. It was refined but violent, surgical but unrelenting. At any speed, in any gear, the Hayabusa delivered power that felt endless. You didn't need to wait for the right RPM band. You didn't need to feather the clutch, twist the throttle, and the bike responded instantly. No delay, no hesitation. Of course, that kind of power required a frame that could survive it. Suzuki didn't just slap the engine into an old GSX-R and hope for the best. They rebuilt the chassis from the ground up, reinforcing the swing arm, thickening the frame walls, and revising the geometry to keep the weight centered and the bike stable under extreme loads. The Hayabusa came in at around 550 pounds wet, heavy by sport bike standards, but it never felt sluggish. Once in motion, the weight became an asset. The bike stayed planted through crosswinds, stable at full lean, and almost eerily calm when crossing 150 miles per hour. And that was the other revelation. It didn't feel like it was trying to kill you. It felt like it knew exactly what it was doing. This wasn't a twitchy race bike tuned for experts. It was controllable, confidence-inspiring. It was fast in a way that made riders feel bold, not foolish. Some of that DNA came from the GSX-R 750, Suzuki's earlier handling masterpiece. The Hayabusa borrowed its layout and balance philosophy, then scaled it up to unimaginable levels. The suspension wasn't track stiff, but refined. The brakes weren't just strong, they were progressive. Every part of the riding experience had been engineered for real-world velocity, not just dyno numbers or race times. By 1999, sport bikes had a language. Angular, sharp, agile, lean. The Hayabusa rejected all of it. It didn't care about track day cool. It was a machine with one job: obliterate the competition. Where other brands hesitated, Suzuki went full throttle. It was grotesque, overbuilt, terrifyingly fast, and absolutely unforgettable. There had never been a bike like it, and soon there would be consequences, because the Hayabusa wasn't just a new benchmark. It was a turning point, not just for performance, but for control. Why it was silenced. The Hayabusa didn't just break records, it broke the system. By the time Suzuki's missile hit the streets in 1999, it had done more than dethrone Honda and leave Kawasaki in the dust. It had crossed a line, one the motorcycle industry didn't realize existed until it was too late. 194 miles per hour from the factory. No special tuning, no closed course setup, no disclaimers. This wasn't a track tool. It was a street-legal motorcycle you could buy from a dealership and ride home on a learner's permit. That fact alone triggered a ripple effect no one at Suzuki could have fully predicted. The headlines weren't celebratory. At first, motorcycle magazines did what they always do: test, measure, rave. Reviewers were stunned by how manageable the speed was. Riders called it refined, powerful, even graceful. But outside of motorcycle circles, the tone was different. Mainstream media called it reckless. Articles began appearing in European newspapers and North American outlets asking the same loaded question. Why does anyone need a 200 miles per hour motorcycle? Politicians started asking about it too. Lawmakers in the UK, Germany, and parts of the EU began raising concerns. Insurance providers were quietly running risk models. Police departments were already wary of superbikes, but this was something else. This was a machine that made highway patrol strategies feel outdated, a bike that could outpace most pursuit vehicles before third gear. Public perception shifted and the Hayabusa stopped being a marvel. It became a threat. Kawasaki's answer only made things worse. Suzuki had fired the shot, but Kawasaki wasn't about to be left behind. Rumors swirled in 2000 of a new machine in the works, the ZX-12R. It would feature a similar engine displacement, cutting-edge aerodynamics, and most importantly, it was rumored to break the 200 miles per hour barrier. This wasn't innovation anymore. It was escalation, an arms race. Industry veterans saw what was coming. If Suzuki and Kawasaki kept pushing, the next few years would bring motorcycles that could reach jet speeds with no roll cage, no seatbelt, no protection, but the rider's own nerve. It wasn't just dangerous. It was politically explosive. And so, quietly, with no fanfare, the world's top motorcycle makers did something unthinkable with the speed limit. Instead, behind closed doors in the early 2000s, Japan's top manufacturers, and then later several European brands, agreed to a voluntary top speed limit for all production motorcycles, 300 kilometers per hour, 186 miles per hour. It would be known unofficially as the Gentleman's Agreement, not a law, not a mandate, but a promise. The deal was simple. No production motorcycle would exceed that ceiling, at least not straight from the factory. It was a preemptive move, a way to avoid government regulation by self-policing the performance envelope. The Hayabusa had set a record so terrifying, the industry had to freeze itself in place. When the Kawasaki ZX-12R finally launched, expectations were astronomical. Many expected it to finally unseat the Hayabusa, but when testers hit the track, something strange happened. No matter what they did, the ZX-12R wouldn't pass 186 miles per hour, test after test, run after run. The bike felt capable of more, but it stopped short. At the time, neither Kawasaki nor Suzuki acknowledged the agreement publicly. But insiders knew. The ceiling had been installed. The war was over, not by victory, but by stalemate. And this wasn't a one-time compromise. In the years that followed, newer models like the Kawasaki ZX-14 and BMW S1000RR launched with speed capabilities clearly in mind, but none broke the pact. They all topped out right at that invisible wall. Though the agreement was informal, its enforcement was real. Japan's Big Four, Suzuki, Kawasaki, Yamaha, and Honda, all complied. So did BMW and later Ducati. In interviews, Honda admitted it participated. The others remained mostly silent, preferring ambiguity over accountability. Why would companies voluntarily neuter their flagship machines? The answer was simple: fear of intervention. European regulators were already threatening import restrictions. US lawmakers were watching with growing unease. One fatal accident involving a high-speed bike could ignite public outrage and permanent legislation. Rather than risk losing control altogether, the manufacturers took control of themselves. If they didn't slow down voluntarily, someone else would force them to. By 2001, the second run of Hayabusas began arriving at dealerships. To the naked eye, they looked unchanged. Same design, same weight, same monster engine. But underneath the surface, something was missing. Suzuki had installed an electronic limiter. The bike would no longer pass 300 kilometers per hour, not because it couldn't, but because it wasn't allowed to. Later generations added more restrictions, refined engine maps, software governors, even gear-based power limits. The power was still there, but it had a leash. The Hayabusa had gone from a wild falcon to a bird in a gilded cage. And yet, despite the limiter, it remained a symbol of rebellion. Riders knew what the original was capable of. Collectors began seeking out the 1999 and 2000 models, the only years untouched by the pact. They became mechanical artifacts, souvenirs from the last days before the sky was closed. In the end, there was no crowned champion of the speed wars, no final showdown, no ticker tape parade, just a line in the sand, and one bike that forced everyone else to stop. Banned, but not banned. Ask any motorcycle rider about the Hayabusa, and eventually, one word will surface: banned. It rolls off the tongue and riders say it with a smirk, as if they're in on the secret. A machine so fast, so dangerous, so uncontrollable, it had to be outlawed. But here's the twist. It never was. Not in the US, not in Europe, not in Japan. No official document, no government notice, no explicit law ever banned the Suzuki Hayabusa. So where did the myth come from? And why does it still feel true? The idea that the Hayabusa was banned didn't originate in a courtroom. It grew in forums, garages, and headlines that never quite clarified what had happened. There were articles warning of rising motorcycle speeds. There were threats of regulation. There were rumors of the European Union cracking down on high-performance imports. But there was no ban, just silence. What actually happened was far more subtle and arguably more dramatic. The Hayabusa didn't get removed from showrooms. It got reprogrammed, quietly, strategically, and without a press release. Starting in 2001, Suzuki simply adjusted the bike's brain and kept selling it. And to most buyers, that was enough. The limiter was invisible unless you tried to break records. Most riders never reached those speeds anyway. But among enthusiasts, the myth had already taken hold. The fastest bike in the world had been caged, and in the minds of those who understood what the Hayabusa really represented, that felt like a ban. The collector's code. If you talk to Hayabusa collectors today, they all say the same thing. The real ones were made in 1999 and 2000. The first generation. The ungoverned beasts. No speed cap, no factory leash, just raw, untethered engineering. Those early models have become mechanical legends, not just because of their power, but because of their freedom. They slipped through the cracks before the gates closed. And they're still out there, tucked away in garages, traded quietly, tuned and modified by those who refuse to accept limits. Some have turbos, some have stretched swing arms, some are left bone stock, a tribute to a moment in time that may never come again. To these riders, the Hayabusa wasn't just fast. It was the last true outlaw. Global panic, local myths. What amplified the idea of a ban was how different countries responded to the Hayabusa's reputation. In Germany and the UK, regulators openly discussed speed limits on motorcycles. Lawmakers warned of potential bans on bikes that could exceed certain thresholds. Insurance companies became more cautious, often raising premiums on bikes like the Hayabusa, regardless of the actual risk. Meanwhile, import laws in countries like India and some parts of Southeast Asia did prevent or restrict large displacement bikes, not because of one model, but due to broader road safety policies. The Hayabusa, being one of the most high-profile machines of its kind, became an easy scapegoat. Even in countries where it remained legal, dealers began warning riders about what they were buying. Some refused to sell to new riders, others required waivers acknowledging the power of the machine. These mixed signals helped the myth spread, and like most good legends, the truth got blurred. Suzuki never denied the speed cap, but they never leaned into it either. Instead, they refined the Hayabusa in quieter ways. New generations came with updated electronics, cleaner emissions, more comfort, and improved handling. But the edge was gone. The fear had faded. The Hayabusa was no longer a panic button. It had become something more manageable, more civilized, a superbike for grown-ups. Still fast, still beautiful in its own strange way, but not dangerous, not threatening. And yet, the legend refused to die. A machine that changed everything. Long after the speed wars faded, one machine still stood alone, not just as the fastest, but as the one that changed the rules. The Suzuki Hayabusa didn't just outrun its rivals, it outran its own era. It came from a time when boundaries were still being tested, when manufacturers pushed forward without asking permission. And then it closed that chapter with a roar so loud, the entire industry backed off. What shocked most people wasn't just the Hayabusa's raw speed, it was how livable that speed was. This wasn't a bike that belonged only on salt flats or racetracks. It could cruise through city streets, glide along highways, even carry a passenger in comfort. It was a missile disguised as a touring machine. The seat was wide and well padded. The riding position, while aggressive, didn't punish your wrists. The engine didn't bark or lurch. It purred until you asked for more, and when you did, it delivered with the kind of seamless acceleration that made everything else on the road feel like it was standing still. You could commute on it, you could tour across countries, you could tear up a drag strip on Friday night, then take a long ride through the hills on Saturday morning. That versatility wasn't a happy accident. It was the result of meticulous engineering. Suzuki built the Hayabusa not just to go fast, but to do everything well. And it did. In time, the Hayabusa evolved beyond its original identity. It became a platform for tuners, customizers, speed junkies, and outlaws. Its massive frame and overbuilt engine made it ideal for modification. Some riders stretched the swing arm to stabilize it for high-speed drag runs. Others slapped on turbochargers and nitrous kits. Some gave it outrageous paint jobs and LED lighting. Some just kept it stock, because it didn't need anything else. The Hayabusa wasn't fragile like other high-performance bikes. It was overbuilt, and that made it indestructible. It could handle abuse, distance, heat, and horsepower, and still come back for more. That durability turned it into a legend, not just among riders, but among builders who knew they were working with something that could take the punishment. Later generations, same DNA. In 2008, Suzuki released the second generation of the Hayabusa. It came with updates: a larger 1,340cc engine, more torque, better brakes, and modern electronics. It was cleaner, safer, and even more refined, but something was missing. The shock, the panic, the feeling that this bike was doing something no one else dared to attempt. The third generation arrived in 2021, even more polished, more features, traction control, ride modes, ABS, everything you'd expect in a modern superbike. It was a technological marvel, but it didn't scare anyone because the industry had changed and the Hayabusa had to change with it. Still, under all the refinements, the DNA was intact. The silhouette, the engine, the name, the spirit of the Falcon still lingered, not as a predator this time, but as a survivor, a reminder of what had once been possible. Other bikes have come and gone, some faster on paper, some more expensive, some more hyped, but none have held on to the culture the way the Hayabusa has. It's not just a machine, it's a message, a challenge to limits, a celebration of excess, a living memory of the moment before the rules changed. The Hayabusa didn't follow a trend. It made the industry confront itself. It asked the question no one else dared to: how fast is too fast? And it didn't apologize when the answer scared people. Even now, decades later, it still commands respect, not just from riders, but from engineers, designers, and critics who understand what it meant to build something that bold and get away with it. Because for one brief, brilliant moment, Suzuki built a motorcycle that ignored the ceiling, and it touched the sky. They didn't ban the Hayabusa, they just clipped its wings before it could fly any higher. But maybe you remember riding one before the leash. Or maybe there's another machine you think deserved the same mythic status. Drop your stories or favorites in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.